Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into some source material today that outlines what has to be one of the most astonishing geopolitical transformations in human history. It is literally a playbook of how a private trading corporation, the English East India Company, systematically transformed itself from a regular business enterprise into a sovereign imperial power that actually conquered the entire Indian subcontinent. We're talking about massive economic manipulation, brilliant military strategy, and aggressive hostile takeovers. It's an absolutely fascinating process to break down together, so let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for the Explainer. First, we'll look at the formula for conquest. Then, the Battle for Bengal. Third, the puppet government. Fourth, the rise of Mysore. And finally, the fall of Tipu's Sultan.
Section 1. The formula for conquest. So when we look at the causes of British success, it's actually pretty fascinating because it goes way beyond just, having better guns. Obviously, superior arms, strategy, and military discipline were absolutely vital. But look at these other engines running in the background here. They paid regular salaries, they had a fair selection system for their civil service, and some really brilliant leadership. But the real kicker, the absolute game changer, that vault right in the middle, strong financial backup. The East India Company was a highly capitalized corporation fighting against fragmented, deeply underfunded regional states. Add a really strong sense of nationalist pride to the mix, and you've got a seriously potent formula for hostile expansion.
Section 2. The Battle for Bengal. At the very heart of this conflict was a simple piece of paper called the Dastak. Now this was basically a VIP trade permit issued by an imperial decree, and its original purpose was to exempt specified East India Company goods from transit duties or tolls in Bengal. It basically meant they could trade duty-free, buying things cheap in a highly competitive market. But, as we see so often with these kinds of corporate loopholes, it really didn't take long for things to spiral entirely out of control.
And this perfectly illustrates that exact economic loophole in action. Company servants started using these duty-free privileges for their own private side hustles. They were literally selling these permits to Indian merchants for a kickback, often using some pretty coercive methods to force dirt-cheap prices. Meanwhile, the local Indian merchants were left facing completely ruinous, wildly unequal competition simply because they still had to pay all those standard duties. This was corporate tax evasion on a massive, massive scale, and it was bleeding the local Nawab dry of his rightful tax revenue.
Well, Mir Qasim, who was by far the ablest Nawab among his predecessors, decided he'd had enough and pushed back with a brilliant three-step strategy. Step 1, he shifted his capital from Murshidabad all the way to Munger in Bihar, basically just getting a safe distance from the company's headquarters in Calcutta. Step 2, he reorganized his bureaucracy and completely remodeled his army. But Step 3 was his absolute masterstroke. He completely abolished all transit duties. For everyone, he totally leveled the playing field. Ironically, the British protested this furiously, basically insisting that they alone deserved a monopoly.
Naturally, this massive economic standoff inevitably turned into a military climax at the Battle of Buxar on October 22, 1764. Major Hector Munro led the English forces against the combined armies of Mir Qasim, the Nawab of Awadh, and Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. And the stakes here, they were monumental. Just imagine it, a private company's private army actually defeating an emperor. But that is exactly what happened in the short, incredibly decisive campaign, and it officially made the English formidable contenders for supremacy over the entirety of India.
Following that victory, Robert Clive essentially locked down northern India's wealth through some truly crushing concessions in the Treaty of Allahabad in August 1765. Just look at the receipts here. The Nawab of Awadh had to surrender territory, pay a massive 50 lakh rupee war indemnity, and just give away the Benares estate. The Mughal emperor, on the other hand, was forced to reside under East India Company protection and, crucially, hand over the Diwani, which is the right to collect revenues, for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa for an annual payment. Meanwhile, the company received millions just to handle military and police functions.
Section 3. The puppet government.
So, the company sets up what they called a dual government in Bengal between 1765 and 1772. And let's be real, this was basically an administrative shell game. The company controlled the Diwani, meaning all the revenue, and the Nizamat, meaning the police, so they held all the actual sovereign power. The Nawab, well, he was left with the responsibility of maintaining peace and order, but with zero funds and zero armed forces. Honestly, it was cruel genius. The company held all the money and all the power, but carried absolutely zero accountability. To manage this crazy setup, the company essentially outsourced the day-to-day governance to proxy deputies. They nominated deputy subadars, specifically Mohammad Reza Khan for Bengal and Raja Sitab Roy for Bihar. The company just pulled all the strings from behind the curtain. But because a corporation's bottom line is ultimately profit, not public welfare, this caused a total system failure. It was a disastrous corporate outsourcing experiment that led to an administrative breakdown so incredibly severe that Warren Hastings actually had to step in and completely abolish the dual system in 1772.
Section 4. The Rise of Mysore. Now, while the British were busy consolidating all this power up in the north, a massive storm was brewing down in the south. What's really fascinating here is how Hyder Ali spearheaded this resistance. He realized pretty quickly he couldn't fight the British conventionally, so he modernized. He actually brought in the French, who are of course the great rivals of the British, to set up a state-of-the-art arms factory at Dindigul, and he introduced Western methods of training for his entire army. He wasn't just building a local force, he was building a genuine, modernized military rival to the East India Company.
And what followed was a staggering 30 years of conflict. As we can see, there were 4 separate Anglo-Mysore wars spanning from 1767 all the way to 1799. This really conveys the sheer scale and the immense resources required for the company to break the resistance of Mysore. This wasn't some quick little skirmish. It was a grueling, multi-generational war of attrition.
Those early wars were an absolute mess of shifting alliances. The First War ended with the Treaty of Madras in 1769, where the British explicitly promised mutual defense. But, surprise, surprise, they broke that promise almost immediately when the Marathas attacked Hyder in 1771. Tensions flared right back up in the Second War over French war supplies coming through Mahe. Amidst this incredibly grueling Second War, Hyder Ali tragically died of cancer in 1782. His son, Tipu Sultan, took over, fought for another full year, and eventually both totally exhausted sides signed the Treaty of Mangalore in 1784.
Section 5. The Fall of Tipu Sultan.
So, the Third Anglo-Mysore War was sparked by a very specific, carefully laid geopolitical tripwire. The state of Travancore, totally backed by the British, purchased territories from the Dutch in Cochin. The problem? Cochin was a feudatory of Tipu Sultan. Tipu correctly viewed this as a direct violation of his sovereign rights, and in April 1790 he declared war. For the British, this was the absolute perfect pretext to strike.
Okay, I want you to just pause and look at this number for a second. 3 crore rupees, 30 million rupees. Take a second to let the weight of that figure really sink in. This was the devastating, almost unfathomable financial penalty exacted from Tipu Sultan when he ultimately lost the Third Anglo-Mysore War.
And that massive sum? That was just one part of the completely crippling Treaty of Seringapatam in 1792. The victors seized nearly half of all Mysorean territory. The East India Company took the highly valuable lands for themselves, while tossing some other regions to their local allies. But here is the most heartbreaking part. To guarantee that staggering 3 crore rupee war damage was paid, the corporation literally took Tipu Sultan's 2 young sons as hostages. They used children as collateral until the installments were delivered.
Well, Tipu did eventually pay the money. He got his sons back, and he declared himself Sultan in 1796, deeply determined to avenge his humiliation. But the new Governor-General, Lord Wellesley, an imperialist to his absolute core, wanted Tipu completely annihilated. To justify this final strike in 1799, Wellesley literally drafted an international conspiracy charge sheet. He formally accused Tipu of treasonous plotting with everyone: the Nizam, the Marathas, Arabia, Afghanistan, Mauritius, and even Versailles in France. He used this sweeping, massive dossier as the final justification to just end Tipu's independent existence for good.
After Tipu was defeated, the British went right back to their trusted puppet playbook. They installed a minor from the old Hindu Wodeyar dynasty, Krishnaraja III, and forced him into a subsidiary alliance in 1799. Fast forward to 1831, and William Bentinck decides to just step in and take direct control anyway, vaguely citing misgovernance. It wasn't until 1881 that the kingdom was finally restored to its ruler. It perfectly showcases how the British manipulated and strung along local rulers long after the actual battlefield wars had ended.
Which brings us to our final question today. How on earth does a private trading company become a sovereign empire? What you really need to take away from this explainer is the staggering reality that the East India Company didn't just accidentally stumble into ruling a subcontinent. They used a highly deliberate formula. They weaponized economic loopholes, they deployed military superiority, they installed completely unaccountable puppet governments, and they drafted financially crippling treaties to systematically dismantle established powers. It wasn't just military conquest, it was the ultimate ruthless corporate takeover. Thank you for exploring this amazing source material with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.